All right. So inside RealFlow, there's many things that we might want to export from this. RealFlow can go into Maya, it can go into 3ds Max, it can go into a bunch of other packages. Okay, we export these things in a proprietary format to RealFlow, and then it allows that to be imported into Maya. Okay, now as we're doing stuff, as we're doing our particles, as we're doing these meshing sims and all that stuff, it is writing it out to the hard drive. So if I go and I find my folder, and this is D2550 whatever, Cherry Splash. If I go into my particles folder, you'll see in here that I have all these bin files. Okay, these bin files are the cache for my particles. That's why when we boot up the system next time and we open up our project, that we can just click on it and it just works. All those particles are still cached and they're still listed there. And you can see at the very end of this, I have, my particle size here, frame 200 is only 4,000. Okay, this is my low res one. Just for the demo, it's a bit quicker to demonstrate than the high res one. Also, we have under the meshes folder, because I've been meshing this, is that I have each one of my particle meshes right here, all the way down to 116, which is my last one. Okay, so it automatically writes these things out. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Maya. And inside Maya, there's an extension for RealFlow. There's a little plugin, and all we have to do is click import and then point it to that folder to say, here's my meshes, and it'll import those things in there. So if I go in here, and I don't see RealFlow up top, okay, I'll wait a second because sometimes it just takes a second for it to load. Or not. Okay, so then I'll go to Windows Settings Preferences, I'll go to the Plugin Manager, and then in here somewhere should be RealFlow. Okay, and if it's not in here, that's fine. I'll show you how to install the thing. So in case for whatever reason your station doesn't have it, all the stations apparently except for this one have it in there. So October updates, RealFlow Maya, and then I run this. Okay, so if you get RealFlow, you should get the RealFlow plugin or RealFlow program, which allows you to run the program and do everything we've done. But then you also would download whichever app you're going to. So if you're going to Cinema, you would download the RealFlow Maya or a Cinema plugin. If you're going to Maya, you download the RealFlow Maya plugin. And then what this is going to do is it's going to go through and it finds your Maya. There's my Maya. And then it automatically installs the plugin into the Maya folder so that when we open RealFlow, that it should have that script inside there that allows us to bring it in. So I'll wait patiently. Okay, so now that this is done, I'm going to go into Maya again, and it should be all set. Okay, now if you do go home and you wanted to work on these, I would make sure you grab that plugin too. Okay, that way if you're at home and you try to open the file, it's not going to read that you're going into RealFlow, or that doesn't have that RealFlow connection. So you still need that plugin there. So I would grab from the resources that RealFlow, there it is, Resources, Applications, October, and RealFlow Maya Win. Grab that and install it. If you need the Mac version, that's not it. I'll have to grab the Mac version. That's the Mac installer. Okay, so now I can go back into Maya, and you'll see if I go to my, what?
Are you importing your OBJ sequence?
No, it's a bin sequence. So I go to my plugin manager, and inside here should be RealFlow now that we've installed it. And again, it's not there. There it is. Okay. Maya, for whatever reason, it organizes these by capital letters first, and then lowercase letters down here, and then the individual. All right.
I think it's looking at the glyph ballot of a font.
Right.
That's come first.
So now that we have this, you'll see that we have all this stuff right here. Okay. It is. And I'm going to go to import bin file. Okay, so here's my importing a bin mesh, and then I just find that folder that had the bin. So I'm going to go back to my D drive, go back to Sarcona 2550 work, cherry splash mesh, and grab that particle mesh. And it'll say here's the padding for it, here's the sequence offset if I need to offset it, and then I just hit create. Okay. Now I see this tiny little patty right here, this hamburger right there, and as I hit play, it's going to make it much bigger. Okay, it's going to stretch it out and start to create that. Now look how quickly that's playing back. It's reading it just from the memory, from our file folder, and so it plays back much quicker. And then we'll see in a second the cherries burst through. There they go.
Now, since that's a sequence of meshes,
Mm-hmm.
if they were to make motion blur work with that?
Yes, it would still work. Motion blur would still work on it. Okay. And then the cherries, right, the cherries are gone. Okay. So I need to import that as well. So if I come up here on my home computer, I have my shelf set to icon with text below so I can read these better. So I would go and import my SD file. And I would go to the same folder location. There we go. And I would go into objects instead of meshes. And inside here is my objects. That should be my cherries. Okay, and if I look, there they are. There are the cherries that I animated inside RealFlow, and they've exported them out, and now everything's lining up. Okay, so now at this point, it's whatever we want. Light it, texture it, render it out. That's all we have to do. Okay. A lot of times what would happen in a studio environment is that low-res mesh, like this one, like I said, is only 100,000 or so. This low-res rig would be sent over to the texturing guy and the lighting guy, and they would do their lighting and their texturing to get everything set up. And then once they're happy with that, then they can say, okay, we're all set. We need to wait for this guy to finish the final sim, and then once he's done, everything just drops in. Okay? So if I decided in this setup here, that I didn't like how the cherries were flying through, I can go into RealFlow, fix how the cherries are moving, resim it out, and then I just go back into Maya, and it's automatically going to reload that the next time I open the file. Does that make sense? Okay? So it's pretty quick as far as what we're doing. All we've done to bring this into Maya is we've imported the bin, and we've imported the SD file right here. There should be some more space in between those. I don't know why there isn't, but we've imported the mesh, imported that. Now we also get, if we had a ground plane, we'd get the ground. You'll see that we also got the cup right here. There's the cup. Now the cup isn't a fancy looking cup. It's a very blocky looking cup. Typically, if we were doing this as a production thing and we wanted to show that cup, we would have a higher resolution cup that we would replace with that one. So we would just delete this one, create a new one, and then drop that in its place. Okay? Even the cherries here, if you look at them, you'll see that they have some sort of animation right there. So if I created my good cherries that have higher resolution, much nicer looking, drop them in that place and just parent them to it, then I can use those as my final rendering out ones. Okay? So as we go back and forth between Maya and RealFlow, then we can low res to go into RealFlow, do our work, and then high res once we are actually rendering our stuff out. Now we have to be careful only when we're doing like a fill object or something. If we have a can and this can is super blocky going all the way around and we fill that up, we're going to see those facets. Okay, so in that case we want to make sure that that is at least rounded nicely so that we don't see that kind of stuff. Okay, so I wanted to show this, so if you have, at that point you're ready to go, then at some point today you can take that into Maya. Import the bin, import the SD file, and then it's all set up. Okay, I don't need anything turned in for this. A lot of this is just practice right now. Okay, there's no assignment for these guys, but I want to go through them so that when you get to that final project, you have enough tools in your arsenal to create something spectacular. All right, so it is definitely recommended that you go through the whole process of importing your mesh in here, texturing it, rendering it out, and playing with it just to see if you understand the process of it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to save this just for fun. I'll just save it to the D drive for now. I'll put it somewhere else later. All right. So one thing I wanted to go over today was just to show another tool inside of RealFlow. So save your work and make a new folder. What? I'm going to reopen RealFlow. Okay, the new project is going to be called wax dripping, and what we're going to do in this case is we're going to create a particle, a mesh, and we're going to fill it, and then what we want to do is make it look like that object is kind of melting a bit. Okay, so with this one you don't have to follow along with it if you don't want to, but again, it's just something good to help you control the particles. A lot of dynamic stuff is how do you create the movement and then how do you control it, right? We created that bullet thing where we just destroyed that building and we knocked it down, but then we had to figure out all those ways to control it. We had the cherry with the water falling, and we had to control how the cherries flew through it and made sense, you know? So what we're going to do is I'm going to use just a regular piece of geometry just to keep it simple, okay? So I'm going to create a cube inside here, and I'm going to keep it, you know, I'm not going to zoom way out and make this huge, but I'm just going to make it kind of like a plank, and I'm just going to raise it up above my ground. Okay, so with this cube, what I want to do is I want to fill this thing with particles, and then I want to drop a ball through it. Okay, now what's going to happen is it should, in my mind, it should hit and then kind of react with it a little bit, and then the thing should just kind of start melting wherever the ball hit. Okay, so we have a box. Under the liquid particles, I'm going to do a fill object. Okay, so this is a special kind of emitter where it's going to be linked to an object. So under the fill object, I'm going to go to object, under fill object, and I'm going to choose the object I want to fill. So I'm just going to pick that cube. Okay, so right now nothing's happened. I have not told it to fill. Okay, for whatever reason the default is set to no. I'm going to say go ahead and fill the volume, and now I should have particles filling this box. Okay, if I look at my particle count pointer, you'll see that my particle count is 57,810 particles. That was way too high for us to start playing with it. So I want to lower that. So when I come down to, or go up to my resolution, I can make that 0.5 and then reset it, and now I'm dealing with 29,000 particles. Okay, so at any point during this, I realize, hey, I need more particles. This is a higher resolution. I just go to the density or the resolution and crank it up. Okay, just like we did with the cherries. And just like you'll do anytime you deal with dynamic stuff inside here. Okay, so I'm going to hit simulate, and we'll see what happens. Nothing. Right? Nothing's happening. Nothing should be happening right now. Why?
No gravity.
There's no gravity. There's nothing for it to affect. Okay, so we'll reset this. We'll add some gravity into the mix. Okay, let me go into wireframe so we can see this. So what's happening now? Why aren't they falling?
They are, but they're bound to the volume.
Right. Okay, so we created them inside this box. We've said gravity's on it, and they start to fall, but they're stuck inside the box. Okay, so we just need to tell RealFlow we're done with the box. We want to use it as a reference. We always have to have that reference there, but we don't want to use it as a dynamic object. So I'm going to go over to the cube, go to the node, and where it says simulation, I just hit inactive. And that is going to turn it off for anything dynamic. Okay, it's still using the shape as a connection, but it's not going to treat it as a dynamic object anymore. So particles will not collide with it. All right.
You can move the box, the particles will move with it.
Correct. If I take the box and I scoot it up a little bit and I reset, you'll see the particles go with it. If I delete the box, I need to make a new box because then the particles won't be there. Okay. Now there are other ways around that too, but for what we're doing, we'll just leave it like that. Okay. So now I hit play or simulate, and we'll see that the stuff does fall down. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So now I'm going to create a ground plane as well. And I'm going to rotate the cube just a bit. And then simulate. And we'll see what's going to happen with this.
Should we set it to a passive body or?
Everything in RealFlow by default will affect particles. Okay? Only when we're interacting with rigid bodies hitting each other do we need to then make them rigid bodies. Okay? So you see, he's falling, it hits the ground. Now this is still way too slow, so I'm going to lower that resolution even further. I'm going to 0.2. Yeah, about 10,000 should be good. There we go. That's much quicker. Okay. Now remember, it's not going to be accurate anytime we're dealing with a lower resolution. When we start bumping up the resolution, it becomes more accurate. When we start playing with these other advanced settings, it becomes more accurate. Okay. As it hits the ground, more stuff is happening, so it's going to take longer. All right. So I'm going to go and lower this even further, just so it goes a bit quicker. And you'll even see how we're getting this like layering process because of how it's set up. Okay, so what it's looking like now is like water. It's not looking like wax, and that's what I want it to look like. Okay, so imagine that we have a big clump of candle wax, not hard candle wax, but like soft gooey candle wax, and it falls. I don't want it to like splatter all over the place. What I want it to do is I want it to maintain its shape and maybe kind of ooze out a little bit. Okay, think of like maybe a really, really wet chocolate bar or something. So if I go to the fill object, because that's where all my stuff is being controlled, and I pull up this attribute called viscosity. Every liquid object has a viscosity to it. And if you go to Google, you can type in viscosity measurements, and they'll actually give you the water's viscosity and gels and all these different ones. Okay, you don't need to play with it that much. If you just kind of go in here and adjust it, you can get a sense of what you're trying to go after. So I'm going to crank it up to 100. Depending on what you're trying to do, it might be 200 or 300 or, God forbid, even more than that. All right, so now with this thing at 100, one, it might explode. The second it hits the ground, this thing might just go and explode. You can see particles are already flying around. All right, but you see we get a different reaction when it hits the ground, right? It's not exploding anymore. What's happening is it just kind of like flops onto the ground, and then it starts to spread out a little bit. Okay, so the higher the viscosity, the thicker the liquid is. So think of something like caramel and think of something like water. Those are two very different fluids, two very different liquids. Okay, and you'll see that this is even kind of like spreading out a little bit. All right, so let's rewind it and play, and you can really see how it kind of spreads out even further right there. Okay. Now I can adjust some other stuff like the plane. Maybe I'll take the bounciness off. I don't want bounciness. Maybe I'll take the stickiness up. Okay. And then I'll just resim it again. And again, these are just settings that you're just going to play with every time. Stickiness, roughness, friction, the mass of these objects. There we go. And we can also look at these, and you'll notice that the particles have colors to them. Okay, the bluer it is, the less movement there is. The whiter it is, the more movement it is. Okay, so as I'm watching this, I'm kind of looking at it and kind of watching for those white ones to pop up out of the blue. Those are the ones that are just kind of freaking out. Once we crank our settings up, we turn our density up, and we turn our steps up in the simulation, it's going to take longer, but it'll be more accurate. And then we'll actually be able to not have that kind of stuff happen. Okay, at least not to the level of the level it's doing right now. Okay, so right now here's our viscosity, and you can see it is freaking out. Right about here, particles just start shooting out all of a sudden. Okay, but those will be gone. We're just ignoring them for now. All right, so now I'm going to hide this cube. This cube is annoying. I'm just going to go to the display and turn off the visibility. Okay, I don't need to see the cube in order for me to see the particles. That's just an irrelevant thing. All right, so now the one thing I said when I started this was that I want to have this thing just kind of sitting here and then have an object fall through, and that object is going to be what's going to trigger this thing kind of falling down. Okay, so imagine that for whatever reason it's floating in space, this thing hits it, and wherever it hits it, those particles are just going to fall down. And then another object could hit it, and then that would fall down. Okay, this works in every direction. If I had a big candle and I launched really hot spheres at it, and the spheres kind of went through and melted it, that's kind of like the same thing. Okay, except I'm going in a different direction. So what I need to do is get this thing to stay in place. So how do I get that to not fall down?
Make it inactive until something hits it.
Make it inactive until something hits it. Okay, now what's going to happen if I make it inactive? At frame 50, I make it active. What's going to happen to it?
The whole thing will fall.
The whole thing's going to fall, right? So we don't want that. Okay, so just as a general thing, I need to make sure that it doesn't fall. So this is where I talked about this last time. We're going to get into this hub, okay? And what the hub is going to allow us to do is control different properties. Right now, everything piped into this hub is interacting together, okay? So I have my gravity here, and gravity is what's pulling this thing down. If I right-click on the line for gravity and remove the connection, gravity is no longer affecting that guy, okay? So if I simulate it, you'll see that it just stays right in place. There's no movement at all. If I click on it, you can see some are kind of freaking out, but those are just the ones that are freaking out because somehow they're colliding with each other, even though they're not moving. Okay? So not a whole lot of stuff going on there. There's also, if we go over here, there's some internal and external pressure. That's what's making them kind of squeeze together. Also, my viscosity is making them kind of squeeze together. So that's why we do get a little bit of movement going in this direction here. Okay, you can kind of see how it scrunches up a little bit. All right, so now he's not moving. So I'm going to create a sphere. Okay, and I'm just putting the sphere above it. And this is where I would make the sphere active, make the ground passive. That way the sphere falls and it collides and hopefully hits it. So the sphere is active, the ground is passive. And then if I start simulating, what's going to happen here?
Still have no gravity.
What's that?
Still have no gravity.
Still have no gravity, correct. Okay, so now I need to connect my gravity just to that sphere. Okay, so I want the sphere to have gravity, but nothing else at the moment. Okay, so all I do, and this is going to take you getting used to, is I have to figure out where the sphere is. The easiest way is just to click it here, and it'll automatically highlight right there. In one of my playing around examples, I had like 20 spheres, and they were all coming from different directions, and to find them all was a bit tricky. So here's my sphere, so I'm going to move it over here. Your daemons, which are these guys here, you'll see they have the red color. They're going to be red, so that's an easy way to find it. So I'm just going to hold down Control and left drag gravity onto the sphere. Okay, so now Control, drag it on there, boom, those two objects are connected. So I'm going to reset again, I'm going to play again, and then we're going to see, there it goes, it's just a slow starter. We're going to see that ball dropping down, and we should also see the ball hit that other object. I'll click on it just so we can see that it actually hits the object. Okay. And because it's a viscous material, you can see that it doesn't like hit it and it sprays out like the cherries were doing. It's hitting it and it's actually trying to maintain that shape. That's what it's trying to do. The liquid itself is trying to hold itself together. The particles are like sticking to each other. So that's why we're getting this kind of thing. And it's also, you can see, it's pulling that surface. All right? So it's very cool that we're getting that kind of reaction, because that's sort of what we want. Not exactly, but sort of what we want. Okay? Now the problem is that these particles still have no gravity to them. So I need a way to turn on gravity at some point and turn off gravity at other points. Okay? So if we look at this right now, you'll see, and it just does that, which is cool. It's a really neat little animation. I'll probably render that out later. Let me save my work. Save your work if you're working. I'm going to go to my daemons, or demons, however you pronounce it, and way over to the far right. There we go. Two things I'll point out. One is magic. This is a cool one. This allows you to take your particles, and as they're emitted or anytime, you can make them form a shape of an object. So like we had the cherries, we could say, I want you guys to form the shape of those cherries, and then I could have the cherries explode and then form the shape of something else, and then explode and form the shape of something else. That's what magic does. I'm going to use the filter here. The filter is essentially an if-else expression. Okay? If the particles are moving faster than this speed, then do something else with them. Okay? And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to click on filter. And with the filter turned on, we are going to play in this area where it says filter. Okay? So we have a source emitter, which is just our fill object. That's what we're emitting them from. And then we have a target emitter. And then we have it's grayed out, but a target emitter if false, a target emitter if true. Okay? So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to test the particles at every frame and figure out some information about them. Based on this information, we'll be able to do this with them or do that with them. Okay? So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create another emitter. The other emitter is going to have gravity on it. So we're going to say if the particles are moving, go to this new emitter that has gravity. If your particles aren't moving, stay on that old emitter that doesn't have gravity. Does that make sense a little bit? Okay. We'll see it in action. It might make more sense. So we're going to go to the liquid particles tab again, and we're going to create another emitter. I'm just going to use a circle one, and I'm just going to move it off to the side. Okay. It doesn't matter where this one is. We're only using this as basically like a null, like a blank object that we can use to create this connection here. Okay? If I reset it and hit simulate, you'll see that particles are coming out of that one, and I don't want particles to come out of that one. Also, our box is gone. Okay? Because we just turned the filter on and just said go, it just disappears because it doesn't have any information to do what we needed to do. All right, which works out perfect because we have to first turn this guy off. We have to turn off this emitter so it doesn't emit stuff. Okay? So where could I turn off the emission of this guy?
Turn this simulation to inactive.
If I turn this to inactive, then when we swap it over to the other one, it'll be inactive also. Okay? So set speed to 0. Okay? Let's set their speed to 0 first. I believe that's the correct one, yes. Okay? Now we can't go up here to resolution and change that to 0 because it doesn't let us. Okay? Density, it might. Yeah, it does. But sometimes when it goes from one density to a different density, you can get some funky behavior. So I typically like to keep the density where it is and just turn the speed down to 0. Okay? So now that that speed is down to 0, I can go back to my filter and start to fill in this information. Okay? So my target emitter is my fill object. It says filter when false. I'm going to click that on. And my target emitter, when it's false, is going to be my circle. Okay? So I'm just going to hit simulate. I have no idea what this is going to do. Always save it before you do anything like that. Okay? So right now it's just simulating. One of the things that is important to do whenever you're testing this stuff out is to not leave a whole lot of space like I did. Let me move this down. right? So we don't have to wait 6 years for the cherries to fly through the liquid. Let's just bring it as close as we can. That way we can test it out as quickly as we can, okay? Obviously it's going to change. Once we raise it up, we give it some more mass and we start doing some other stuff with it and it goes through, then it'll change what it's doing. Now as it's going through, I see that these ones are turning white in here and these ones are still blue. If I click on my circle, these are all the particles that are part of circle. So what this means is that 0, let me hit escape, 0 particles have transferred over to the new emitter. Okay, they're all still locked into fill object. So going back to the filter, let's look at the other attributes that we have. Okay, so we have a true or false. That's what's going to drive this thing. Okay, if it's true, it's going to go to fill object 0, 1. If it's false, it's going to go to circle 1. Okay, now let's figure out what it is that it's asking, what is true and what is false. Here's the condition: greater than speed 0. Okay, so in English this means if the speed is greater than 0, then you are going to go to the fill object. If the speed is 0 or less, then go to the other one. At no point is it 0 or less. Okay, it's always going to be higher than that. Maybe at the very first frame. Let's see if it ever attaches to this. No, it doesn't. Okay, so we need to add a little bit more stuff in there. So I'm going to say if the speed value is greater than 5. Okay, so what should happen now is that as it hits it, look at that. I clicked on my circle. It's already, all of those are now part of it. Okay, they were on fill object. You see now fill object is gray. If I click on circle, now circle is the one that's lit up because all my particles have swapped from the old emitter to the new one. If I reset this and watch it, you'll see they go right away. Okay, so 5 is too low of a number. So let me bump this up to maybe 10. Nope, and they're still all on it. That's weird. Object, filter. All right, so if the speed is greater than 10, go there. Otherwise, go there. Oh, I went the wrong way. If speed is greater than 10.
One speed. I think maybe one is less than.
Yes, that's what I want, is less than. Thank you. It is lower than 10. There we go. All right, so we did is lower than 10, and so what should happen now is nothing happens until the particles get to a speed of 10, and then they will start to interact with it. Now, because we're going, the ball is just starting to move and it hits it, and this is a viscous liquid, we're not getting anything getting close to 10. Okay, so I'm going to reset this, go back to my filter, change this to 2, and then click on the circle again so I can see if any of these transfer. And I can see right away as the ball hits this that they are transferring over to the other one. Okay, so all of these blue ones in the mix now are ones that were part of filter or fill object and are now being transferred into the new circle one. Okay, now they're still not falling down because of no gravity. Right, because remember we hand connected the gravity to P sphere 1 or to sphere 1. So there's the circle, control drag the gravity onto the circle, and you can see how messy this is going to get with all of this stuff happening right here.
Such thing as that noise, make it nice.
Yes, it would be nice, wouldn't it? Circles there, that's there. Okay, I'm just making sure we're all set. Good. Alright, so now we'll grab the circle again and we watch. And now as it hits, the ball's movement is influencing the particles, but then gravity is also influencing them. So what should be happening is it hits and now it's starting to pull them down, affected more by the gravity than the ball. And now you can see that it's definitely kind of falling in this cool fashion. And it might, depending on the weight of the ball, how many particles we have. Okay. So does it look like it's behaving the way that it should behave? What's wrong?
Well, I suppose it's just adjusting the. It doesn't look like wax anymore.
Right. It turned into water, right? Okay. Just like we had the property on the old one to say this is a viscous liquid, the circle one should have that too. So if I go to the fill object, we change viscosity to 100. On this one, our viscosity is set to 3. So I have to make sure that I've changed that there too. Okay. So I just make sure both of those are the same. I save my scene and I simulate it again. Always save whenever you do a filter. Typically what happens is it's fine until it hits and then it crashes. If you haven't saved, then you have to redo it. Okay, so now that we have this viscous liquid, now it should be falling in a more viscousy way. It kind of is. It's because it's hitting it and it's kind of spreading out, and now they've become separated. But our hope is that once we add a bunch more particles in there, there's more collision with the sphere, that it doesn't do that. Now if it does, then that just means we need to up all those settings. We need to up the viscosity to maybe 200 to 300. I have had it up to 400 before, okay? But it's definitely not splashing or bouncing around, which is good. Okay, and you can even see we have a couple little stragglers out here. These guys are just kind of hanging out. Okay, now they got moved. You know, there's nothing we can do about that except then go back later and animate some sort of field kind of pulling them down. Just like in Maya, we can have a gravity cube. We can animate a gravity cube going through this thing too. Oh, look, it is spraying out. All right, let's see what that looks like. Okay. Now again, I think that's just the simulation, because we still have the low settings on the simulation. We still don't have a lot of particles, so it's going to run slower. If I went to my simulation options, this is set to 300. I may have to take that up to 800, 900. Okay. The tighter this fluid is, the more like butting against each other they do. So there's more work that it has to do to make sure that it doesn't freak out. And so right now it's kind of freaking out. So if I put that to 800, it's going to take forever to render or to simulate. So we're still in that phase. Eventually you'll get to the point where you understand what's going to be part of that upping the settings here and what's an actual thing that we need to be concerned about. As long as you know that your numbers are right, you just have to try it. You just have to go in there and up your max steps to maybe 600 and then simulate it again and then see where you're at. And if you don't get the same effect, then you know that, okay, well, I did this or that or whatever. Okay, and definitely because we don't have a whole lot of particles in here, there's not a whole lot for them to stick onto. You can see the big gaps that are inside here. We definitely need a lot more of that to get that full, realistic, waxy kind of look. Also, I'm going to go to the sphere and just make sure bounciness isn't on. And maybe sticky is turned up a little bit too. And you can have multiple filters. You can have one filter that says if the speed of the particles are going so fast, then do this. You can see we're getting a totally different simulation now that it's going through like that. If the particles are all by themselves, do this. If this is happening, then do that. And see, it's going still a bit slower. They're sticking together a bit better. It's still spreading out maybe too much, so maybe I'll take this and up my resolution on here. Maybe even take it up to 1. Save it, and then let this simulate, and then just see what happens with it at that point. Okay? And you can see how slow it's going to go. Anytime you do dynamics, it's going to crash. The point of it at first is just iterations. The more iterations you can run, the quicker you can get through and see what settings you don't want and get to the settings you do want, the better off you're going to be. Okay? So And it did crash. So at this point, again, we're at that same stage of just playing with the settings. We play with the viscosity, we play with the mass, we play with the height of the ball, we play with the other settings. Let me show you this other one, if it'll open. And this one I had another object. Is we have a particle here, here, and here, and here. It's not going to create a surface right there if it's considering that each particle is this big. Okay? What it likes to do is find these little clusters of particles, something like this, and say, okay, well now if we took all of these and we put a little circle around those, you can see how then RealFlow could create this shape around it, because it makes sense that it says, okay, these are actually particles. So what we can do is these smaller ones, we can change the radius. Okay, and then RealFlow would say, okay, well that's sufficient enough, I'll create some sort of shape there. All right. Obviously we have millions of particles, so we don't see, typically we don't see this little blobby pattern happening. All right. If we are getting a bunch of these like weird ones where we do have like a particle here, a particle there, and RealFlow's creating these things, that's where we can take that radius down so that they don't show there, or we can make it bigger so that now it's going to blend those together. Okay? And a lot of that is just based on you playing around with those settings. It's a matter of doing it. So this is my mesh. I would just say build. There we go. And I'm going to hide my emitters. So I'm just going to go here. And a quick way to do this is to just right click and say show, nope, not show, view, nope. All right, it's to right click on them here and say visibility hidden. There we go. All right, so then I can look at that and I'll go up to where we have the little flap at the end, which is cool. And I'll say build the mesh for this frame. Oops. There we go. And I can look at that little flap there and I can see, does that flap look good or does this look too thick? Okay, if that looks too thick, I have to kick this pole. These things are just too big. Making those little particles smaller allows me to make that area smaller. So I can come in here and say, well, the radius is going to be 0.02. And you can see how it just kind of got rid of that because it didn't see it as valid enough. It didn't see that these dots were touching enough for it to actually make a surface. So then I could say, okay, well, let's make it 0.04 and see if we get something. All right, we're getting something there. And then I can go through and just keep playing with this until I find that magic number that I'm happy with. Now, once I get more particles in the scene, obviously that's going to become a different number, okay? Because now we're getting more particles. So it makes more sense to just leave it the way it is until we're ready for the final meshing and then do that. I can also come here to this particle mesh and where it says auto polygon size, and this one it's set to no, but sometimes it is set to on or yes. And what it does is it just kind of figures out what should be the best size of particles or polygons. And polygons, it's referring to these little triangles here. So it found that 0.08 is the number it wants. I don't like that number, so I'm going to turn that off. And I'll type in my own number, 0.05. And we'll see that these now become smaller. Because they're smaller, we can add more detail to it. Okay, so you can see all the little dimples we get right there. Make it even smaller, 0.025. And we'll get even more dimples. Okay? Now because we've set this to such a small number, and then there's also smoothing, which is right here. So this smoothing operation is going to take some of this stuff, and it's going to kind of smooth it out. So we don't get these like blocky spots that would actually smooth it out. So if I make this 300, it basically is averaging the vertices. So it becomes a much softer mesh. Now again, that could be something that could hurt it if we're really trying to make sure that we maintain some really cool grooves in it. Look what I've done here, I've just destroyed it. All that nice little intricate work that we had is gone. All right, so we have to be careful with some of these settings because we can't go too high on them. So I think this was set to 50. 50 is, it doesn't look good, but then I would go through and play with some of my other settings to get rid of some of that blobbiness. Okay, I would take this polygon size up for sure. One of my gripes about RealFlow is that I can't just change settings without deselecting it to see what it's going to look like. So that looks sufficient. Okay, it looks kind of like lumpy candle wax, which is what this one was supposed to be. There's also filters, and what the filters are going to do is it's going to take this information, instead of it just making it a very linear, this one is this big and this one is this big, it's going to allow us to do things like thinning and relaxing and adjusting tension. So if I take my thinning up to 0.1, we're not going to see a whole lot of stuff happen here, but what it's going to do is give us kind of like more streaks inside of it. Okay. All right. So if you get a chance, play with the filtering. It's really cool. I'm going to show one more today just so you can see it because it's kind of just a neat little thing. And this is just going to be a quick one. It's nothing crazy. Okay. It's just something that looks really cool. That's it. All right, so I'm going to go into Maya and I'm just going to create a cube. And I'm going to put a bevel on this. There we go. .1. 2 segments there, and then I'm just going to smooth this out a lot. Okay, and the reason I'm doing this part inside Maya is because I need the divisions. In RealFlow, I wouldn't get the divisions. There's too many divisions. Maybe 3. All right, that should be good. All right, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to export it using the Alembic, and I'm just going to put it into that same folder that I just created, which is in C:, blah, blah, blah. Let's export that again. Okay, and I'm going to drop this into my objects folder, and I'm going to call this cubes. So now in RealFlow, I'm going to import my object. There it is. And I'm just going to duplicate it and rotate it. And rotate it. There we go. So I'm just going to take all 3 of these guys, and instead of making them active rigid bodies or passive, I'm going to make them soft bodies. So what's going to happen now is that it's going to treat them as like a soft mass. So it's kind of like a mix between an active rigid body and then a particle. I'm going to create some gravity in here. And then, oops, make sure the ground is a passive. And you'll see that these things are going to fall, but when they fall, they're going to do this cool thing where they just kind of like flop. And then changing some of the properties, obviously we can get different reactions with it. I can take one of these things and rotate it this way so that that part hits first and does this really cool like belly flop type thing. It's probably going to be too soft right at the start of it. I hit escape so I can save it, and then we can just kind of look at this and see how it's interacting with it, where now that top one is like bending over the top of the bottom one. and they're actually like folding in on each other, making it kind of jiggly and really neat looking. There it goes. Okay, and the soft body over here has its own properties. You'll see that it has a mass, it has a resolution. Okay, the higher the resolution, the more deformation we can get on that thing. Okay, the more accurate deformation we can get. It has some stiffness, it has some elasticity, friction, plasticity, which is the ability to make it a permanent thing. So imagine that you had a piece of sheet metal and you take a baseball bat and you smack it really hard. That dent's not coming out of there, okay? So that's what we're getting with plasticity, is the ability to dent something and keep it there, all right? Imagine you threw the cherries through the water and it landed in something else and just wanted to dent it for whatever reason. We could do that. Okay, so you can see this little cool thing here, and again, we can just export these guys out to Maya and create some pretty interesting looking animations, okay? And I mean, how simple was that? I created a couple cubes, dropped them, and then bring them back into Maya and render it out. Okay, put some cool shaders on there. All right, like I said, RealFlow is a super awesome program because it makes it so simple and it's pretty accurate. I mean, that's the best part. If it's not, I go to the options, and these guys, because they're dynamic rigid bodies, we would edit the karate. And we would just change the quality up. Typically I leave the jittering where it is, but we can turn the quality up. And again, higher quality, longer processing time, so just keep it low for now. Okay, but even that, I mean, that still looks pretty good without upping any of the quality settings. And you can take that into Maya, smooth it out, bam, done. Okay.